Welcome to the StatAI podcast.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of our journey into the future of emergency medicine, a realm where artificial intelligence isn't just a buzzword, but a beacon of hope and a tool for transformation. I'm DJ Apakama. My co-host Ethan Abbott and I are both emergency physicians, and we have witnessed firsthand the burgeoning role of AI in our field. Our everyday experience grappling with healthcare disparities and social challenges have led us to a pivotal question. In the wave of AI applications, what changes are coming to emergency medicine, and will they be for the better? This podcast was born not just to ask these critical questions, but to seek out answers from the experts, to understand and to demystify the potential of AI in emergency medicine. We believe in bringing this conversation to the wider community to embrace AI as a tool for positive change. This podcast is our exploration of that future, a journey we invite you to join. So let's embark on this path together to learn, to question, and to envision a new era of emergency medicine enhanced by the power of AI.
All right, DJ, yeah, that was a great introduction to our first inaugural podcast. I think I'm incredibly excited to be here and to take on this very interesting topic of emergency medicine and artificial intelligence. I think my interest, as is yours, is looking at how these technologies are going to evolve in the clinical environment and how moving forward will change the practice of emergency medicine, how we interact with patients.
Yeah, certainly. And the interaction with patients is one thing, but I think we're both particularly interested in kind of the social aspects and making sure that as we go forward and integrate AI with our workflows, that we don't perpetuate any biases or really kind of disparities, make anything worse than it was previously. We really want to see kind of the process that leads to kind of successes with AI versus making sure that we call out any pitfalls. And that's super happy to have a list of, I think, esteemed experts who are, certainly more knowledgeable than I am to talk about this, to kind of, go through our concerns and work through problem sets so that our listeners can really kind of feel like they are in on this coming wave and not kind of getting washed away by it.
Yeah, and I think both of us are really focused on the emergency medicine aspect, and I think it's a real opportunity given the changes and challenges of emergency medicine over the last couple of years in terms of patient boarding and crowding and some of the other major sort of things that have come up over the years, especially after the pandemic. And so I think learning how these tools and technologies, artificial intelligence and machine learning and other tools that are coming out in the last few years can hopefully improve patient care and also improve clinical workflows from the physician side. And I think we've assembled a pretty interesting list of potential guests, and hopefully our listeners will be able to learn and appreciate some of the interesting new technologies that are coming out.
And I think they will. One thing that really made a huge difference, I think, kind of not only in the research realm, but certainly in the public general consciousness of artificial intelligence was the release of ChatGPT last year and kind of its rise to, meteoric kind of usership. I think a lot of people look at that kind of progress in the non-healthcare domain and start to ask, well, what is coming? And I think that's where we have kind of correctly positioned ourselves, because there are things coming. And, while ChatGPT is a fine large language model, there are other large language models. There are other statistical methods. There are other kind of neural nets that can be used to kind of accomplish things. And we want to talk about all of these things, not just, what's in the public consciousness, but also some of the things that are not and some of the things that are coming.
And I think, this is going to be a real opportunity to not only learn sort of the technical aspects of some of these things, but to better understand how we can, as you mentioned, address some of the potential biases and pitfalls that are likely to emerge from these technologies.
And I guess if I could just add one more thing, is that I hope that this is a little bit more interactive, obviously, between you and me and our guests, but I really want to encourage anyone listening to this who has questions to reach out. And if they're, can think of some guests or content that they want covered, we're extremely open, and we want this to be kind of a useful platform for other emergency physicians who are embarking on a journey into AI.
I think our first guests today are at the forefront of AI in terms of integration into the electronic health record. And I think we're both pretty excited to have Chris Alban and Garrett Adams on to discuss some of that. And I think it's a great sort of first guest. And I think the electronic health record is one of those things that as emergency physicians, we have a sort of love-hate relationship with. And I think
Absolutely.
I think that's hopefully some of these things that we're going to discuss will improve clinical workflows for physicians and hopefully also help with patient care and communications between physicians and patients.
Yeah, I think we'll certainly ask them that. And you're right, they're kind of positioned perfectly to speak authoritatively on this, specifically, at least from kind of whatever Epic's going to be working on. But, Chris and Garrett both have enough inside industry experience to really kind of shed light on, I think, the whole broader process. And so just like you, I am really excited to have them, and I can't wait to get into that. And I am really excited for this episode. As we were just saying, there is a lot to cover. AI means a lot of things to different people. And we do have two legitimate industry experts here today, and Chris Alban and Garrett Adams, and really happy to kind of pick their brains about not only what's coming with Epic, but to speak a little bit more broadly of the industry and kind of trends in general.
And DJ, we should probably put in a little disclaimer here just for our listeners.
Please note that the views, opinions, and information expressed in this podcast are solely those of the individual speakers and do not necessarily represent those of their employers, our sponsors, or any affiliated organizations. The content provided is for informational and educational purposes and is not intended as medical advice. We encourage you to consult with qualified healthcare professionals for any medical concerns or treatment decisions. This podcast is not a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. So without further ado, let's just get straight into it. Chris Alban has been a physician informaticist at Epic for over 25 years. At Epic, he plays a key role in guiding the development and strategic direction of their clinical applications, mostly by collaborating with physician leaders at customer sites. Before joining Epic, Chris practiced emergency medicine in Pennsylvania and Minnesota. He also remains actively involved in the American College of Emergency Physicians, which is actually where I met him.
I'm also excited to introduce our other guest today, Garrett Adams. He is a software developer and one of the clinical product leads at Epic. He's been a part of the team there for about 13 years and specializes specifically in the deployment of generative AI within the company. And his expertise lies in understanding clinical workflows and emerging AI technologies. And thank you so much for being here. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having us. Yeah. Kind of excited. We're kind of lucky to be the first ones. Yeah.
Lucky
or unlucky.
Yeah, exactly. One of the two.
Yeah.
I think, kind of just setting the ground floor, as I just mentioned, we do have, I think, a general audience of emergency physicians, or certainly will one day. And we want to kind of serve as a conduit between the questions they might have and the expertise represented by you two here. So it might be helpful if we just start out by maybe defining kind of AI or, machine learning for non-experts, or how do you guys define it in your daily workflow and practice?
Sure. So AI is a broad umbrella term for a number of different algorithmic techniques or types of technologies. You can think, and it's not really something that's new to our industry, but this new flavor of large language models or generative AI is the new piece. So you can think starting out earliest with rules-based logic, a series of if-else or decision trees that are very predictable and deterministic. Give some inputs, get some defined output, be able to codify some decision-making. Then you get into more advanced techniques and what we have been most familiar with predictive algorithms, where you give a large number of inputs, to a little bit too much to compute mentally given those same inputs, but it's really just a best fit curve calculation to predict some outcome, like fall risk or
Deterioration,
yep. Risk of or chance of readmission, things like that. And then you get into a different type of math to drive the AI, which is neural nets. And it's the size of the neural net. So modeled after the human brain for how neurons interact with each other. And, early use cases for this were things like natural language interpretation, speech to text, things like that. But what's new is large language models that demonstrate more general intelligence and comprehension and can generate novel content.
It's
Yeah, it's
cool
perfect.
because you start to see this evolution really from very deterministic, where we had to nail down all the rules. And you go back, you mentioned my long history with this. I remember back in the early days doing something with hypertension with one of our customers, and the challenge was you had to outline every single rule and every if then, and it's very complex as opposed to where we are now, where we've got the opportunity to use these tools and let the systems do some of that complexity, where we can still operate more in the clinical and operational setting.
Do you think there was a turning point in the last 5 years, whether it was a particular paper or publication or algorithm or technology that really sort of transformed this whole sort of landscape for Epic and for your team?
Yes, from a research and development side or scholarly article side, there was a paper done on attention is all you need that really started to drive the current direction of how large language models are trained and created. But it's interesting because even, GPT-4, all the buzz right now for what its capabilities are, it's been growing up for a long time. It's not a model that just appeared out of nowhere last year. But what did change was a kind of elbow in its performance and demonstrating capabilities that surprised us, surprised the creators, surprised everyone across the world. And what that opens the door for is a lot of new language-based applications for AI that just weren't possible before in a much lower barrier to entrance. And I think that the advancements are incredible. One of the notable ones that I think of is the jump from GPT 3.5 to GPT 4, the original free version of ChatGPT, and then the paid version today, and one of the most capable models, was the performance on the uniform bar exam. There was a number of tests that it leapt in performance on, but notably this one that shows more logical reasoning and comprehension beyond just things like fact regurgitation. And it demonstrates a new set of skills that we can use in interesting ways.
I didn't see them try to do the emergency medicine written in oral boards, but it'd be interesting to see how that would play out. That's a whole separate role-playing game experience.
Yeah, I actually think that it might do pretty well at the written. I think the oral is still probably a little bit, it's not as clearly defined.
No.
I think that that you bring up a great point. So large language models, all the rage right now. And certainly we've seen kind of a drastic improvement in how they've been built. And certainly there are applications that people are starting to use them for. You've mentioned kind of some use cases. Now I wonder more specifically for emergency medicine. We're seeing things like using large language models at triage for disposition predictions, or kind of predictions for who is likely to deteriorate in the emergency department. I heard you guys mention fall risk, but what kind of things makes you excited, like on the curve? What's coming that really is what's getting you up in the morning to kind of work on these systems?
Yeah. And I think that really centers it on our focus with this, because there's a lot of the crazy and interesting academic related stuff with AI, but a lot of it boils down to, especially for us and for me, it's like, okay, so how do we actually solve problems? How do we improve things? How do we use that as a tool that helps us, to your point? Does that help do a better, more accurate triage? Does that help us address operational issues? Can it, and so some of those practical things are some of those risk score type things. So it might be prediction for admission. And how does that help us manage a department? How does it help us manage potentially across multiple departments and recognize we can do some load balancing if that factors in? So there's some of those operational things that are kind of interesting. And then there's the really direct practical stuff. Might help an individual doc, right? Use these tools are helping the advancement on the ambient side in terms of note generation, which, going all the way back to forever, nobody really liked documenting. Whatever the tools are that have come along in the years, they've tried to help it make it easier and everything. it's always been a byproduct or a secondary thing to what you're doing. Ambient starts to bring the reality to, okay, if I just voice it while I'm talking with the patient and the family, what have you, I get a note out of it. And that has advanced. It was starting to come along. The vendors were working on it for a while, but the last year has seen tremendous improvements in the speed and the quality. Garrett was mentioning the evolution from 3 to 3.5 to 4. We're seeing that have an impact on the tools as those vendors that create that, and as we integrate that in. So some of the first releases of the fully integrated one are coming out from us. It's mostly on the outpatient side, but the ED is like fast behind that because it obviously makes a lot of sense for many patients. There's always the specialization of what about a complex trauma? Sure, that's fine. It's many voices. It does not appear that it's a perfect fit for everything, but hey, it's a fit for a lot of stuff. And I think that's where it can make a big difference. So that's a big one right there. Another big one that's really practical is, all right, based on all that stuff that we talk about and all the things that might be in the chart for a given patient, generate really targeted, good discharge instructions,
Yep.
Generate them in a way that, sure, it's going to be, I'm going to review them, whoever the doc, you're not just going to say, hit the, I'm feeling lucky button. But in terms of, let me see what they are and get that teed up with, again, very little effort, but rather as a byproduct of the things we do in the chart that everybody's doing as a part of the team, taking care of a patient and knowing things about the patient. What's their primary language? What's their reading level? Let's put those things in and make that a little more tailored, a little more easier to do with less effort. And that's another great example.
Yeah.
So, go ahead.
I think about the ways, where are the places that you're interacting with the system for administrative work, where you're trying to get up to speed, review information so that you can then go make decisions about the patient. Where are you communicating with others? And those are often the points where we can help with technology to gather some of that information and summarize it in the right format, help you draft information for communication, or help tailor your the communication that already exists for a patient to be able to understand easily. I think these are some of the, I'll even call them low-hanging fruit for what we can accomplish with generative AI.
Just reference even in that concept of low-hanging fruit. There's things we can do with in a relatively short time frame to release capabilities that end users can start using quickly, and that's rewarding. It. We don't have to wait for that research to get done. We've already done a lot of that. The groundwork's been put in place to make a lot of that possible now. And so the summary stuff Garrett's talking about has applications across the full spectrum of medicine.
Right.
Whether it's nurse summaries in the hospital, whether it's discharge summaries, whether it's I'm seeing a new patient in the ED and they're a complex one, sum that up in a paragraph for me and I don't have to dig through the chart looking for it. Those little things save time, save mental effort, save some of that burden concept of getting me up to speed on a given patient quickly. I sometimes joke, and probably this is out there, these tools as an assistant, if you will, that's like having the best intern ever. and
stuck at that reporter level where they're getting all the facts right.
Yeah.
And being able to present it to you.
We can nail that in a way that, and you could also think about those as part of this tool is, how do I tune that for me as an ED doc versus you, DJ, or you, Ethan? You might want different flavors of it. You might think, well, I'm in a geriatric ED or I'm peds only or what have you. Those little tunings for not just the patient, but the audience, the user, the consumer of that output could be.
Yeah. It actually strikes me that there might, there's a pretty large, equity component to that too.
Absolutely.
Right. You already mentioned kind of, languaging. We work here in New York City. Obviously, there are many languages spoken here. And, sometimes when you go to the drop down, there's only 6 or so options and, it can be very, very insufficient. So I think that particular aspect of it, along with others, it definitely has kind of bringing more equity and kind of more, viewpoints.
DJ, that resonates a lot with me. I've been on the receiving end of communication that I didn't understand at the time because I didn't have the medical expertise, and not knowing what's going on can be panic inducing, and it leads to more communication, more questions downstream. And one of the applications that I'm most excited about for generative AI is being able to take some of that complex language that's necessary to go from provider to provider, to perform the job. And then being able to distill that down, not only transform it into the right language, but also the right reading level, the right level of medical knowledge background, and add some additional pros for helping make it understandable, not create some of that fear that can be concerning when you're going through a health journey. And I think the potential to reduce inequity through that is incredible.
Yeah, and I think that's probably pretty significantly important given the, the recent sort of change in transparency with medical records with the Cures Act. And I think, offering, patients a sort of a more understandable way to view their own medical record, I think is really important, especially now with notes being released pretty quickly after they're written.
Yeah, and the same goes with results release. Really, the larger theme you're hitting on, Ethan, is that transparency throughout. So part of what we also continue to work on, and part of our trick, is how do we use these types of tools to help support some of that ongoing communication needs for patients during ED visits. And many of our customers are asking about that as where do you do that in a thoughtful, helpful, supportive way that doesn't get in the way of what the docs and nurses are doing, and doesn't get in the way of the overall course of care, but helps keep patients and family updated. That's going to be a trick. That's part of that ongoing work we're doing, and heavily with our customers. So where do you do that in a thoughtful way? Where can this generate some of that information? Can it generate those messages to patients in a way that's useful? We'll have to see. There's a lot to be figured out.
Yeah, I certainly think, in terms of, working in the emergency department, when patients are telling me their results before I've seen them,
right.
certainly creates a bit of an awkward scenario. And so I think, trying to find some way to address that and in a sophisticated way is obviously a real challenge. Yeah.
I do wonder that you guys kind of touched on the promise of kind of LLMs. Now, there are some dangers I've seemed to have kept track of. And I do wonder about, since we just mentioned the word transparency, previously there used to be a lot more attention kind of to the hallucination ability of these models. Have you guys seen that in your work? And how are you kind of working around this inherent feature, I will say, of large language models that, we really don't necessarily have a lot of tolerance for in the clinical realm?
Yeah. Since working with generative AI, I've never been more aware of my colleagues and friends' hallucination rate as they speak.
That's a good point, actually.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah.
Yeah. There's a lot of, did you mean, and that kind of thing. But, realistically,
You're not checking your friends' references. And
I require inline citations now. Yeah. No, I mean, there's a lot of model advancements help reduce the frequency of these kinds of things, but then also there's a lot of techniques you can do on both the design development, prompt engineering side to really hone in the precision of the responses. And then also on the post-processing and deployment side for monitoring how it's performing and being able to have evaluation tools that are running on the fly that determine whether or not something like this has occurred. It's interesting, the difference between generating an error as it is writing output versus being able to post-process the entire input and output and determine if there was an error made is actually quite effective. But I'd say that, those are great techniques, but those alone aren't sufficient. And a lot of it also comes down to thoughtful workflow design. We often tee things up as drafts and ensure that there's a human in the loop to review the AI assisted output. In that same vein on workflow design, we also, have consistent iconography, styling, feedback, transparency for info bubbles and what went into generating the answer. All of these things are kind of base level competency for doing this thoughtfully and responsibly. I think that it's going to be a continuing learning as folks work with this technology. And there's a lot of ways, a lot of components that go into doing it thoughtfully to make sure that it's helping and doesn't have the potential for harm.
Yeah, I mean, in many ways, it's another set of tools we're embedding in the system. And really that takes advantage of the fact that we already have a whole patient safety monitoring, quality assurance sort of process fully built in And this just gets plugged into that. And we have to be aware of what the tool can bring and what its inherent weaknesses might be, it have a tendency to hallucinate. Okay, great. We're going to have to factor that into how we use that in any given tool, how we develop.
One really good example of that, I feel, in the context of summarization, when we are taking a large amount of input data, structured or unstructured, and then distilling that down into a succinct summary. I think it's one thing to put that summary out as is, and it's an entirely different thing to put that summary out, but then for each assertion or fact that the language model makes in the summary, having a citation back to the source information, which not only one fun fact, when you ask an AI to prove its work, tell me why you knew that fact and why you made that claim, that actually makes it more accurate as one of the prompt engineering techniques. But what it lets us do is right in line, embed a link back to the source information so that users can self-validate and not rely on trusting it as is. Really similar to that intern or that person.
Yeah, exactly. Trust but verify.
Exactly.
And the other point in many ways is there's also utility to that, because it's not just proving that it's correct. It's your clinical process may be that, wait a second, I need to drill in on that. I need more about that pointer of information that may have just been summarized in a couple of words or a sentence, but I need more there. And so having that reference link that supports it and being able to drill into there, get that full procedure report or whatever that might be. It mentioned they had a cap, but wait a second, I need to know what happened in that cap. I need to look at specifics or from an echo or something like that. That provides not just proving the point, but it's also giving me the thread to follow to get the additional information I need. So some of that is on us, is how do we build that into the system in a way that's useful. And I think that's part of for us, it's, again, this also goes to the phrase we hear, you think about, this isn't going to replace docs, but docs who don't use this stuff will, there are people who do, but similarly, EHRs that don't use this stuff are going to get replaced by those that do. Granted, so it's definitely on us to make sure we are moving as fast as we can, engaging with our customers on all this as much as we can, and really giving it the full court press that it needs, because there are tremendous opportunities for what this can do. So,
yeah, agreed.
Your editorial.
One question I think DJ and I had is when the team is, designing these customized solutions with specifically sort of emergency medicine in mind, what are sort of like the key considerations and challenges? Because I'm sure, you're designing solutions for, inpatient teams and for, outpatient clinic settings or surgical centers or whatever. I guess what are sort of the considerations for emergency medicine? Because I think, for DJ and I think we sort of imagine ourselves as often operating with very limited data to begin with.
Yeah.
And patients who sometimes are, aren't necessarily able to communicate their needs always effectively, because of their, illness or, whatever's going on. So I'm just kind of wondering, when you're designing these solutions specifically for emergency medicine, what are there sort of considerations or approaches that you might take?
Yeah, I think the one about not having the background or necessarily a responsive individual to chat with, when we design different workflows, different prompts, different use cases across different apps, it may be summarization in the same concept in a bunch of different places, but the inputs and then the actual instructions are very tailored to the scenario. So, in an inpatient scenario, it might be consume the last 12 or 24 hours of information and then tee that up in an update format. But in an emergency medicine scenario, you need to go more broad on what you're grabbing as input, highlight more things such as allergies and things that could cause conflict if you don't have someone there to converse with. So it's a similar, methodology for how you get output generated, but very different in the instructions and how you generate it.
Yeah. And I think a lot of that goes to our larger process for almost everything we do here. In many cases, we look at a given tool, a given concept, a given workflow, and go, okay, this applies. This is company-wide, if you will. This is system-wide. There's going to be specific implementations of this for specialty outpatient or primary care outpatient or for, labor and delivery or ED, what have you. And so the benefit of having teams that are very focused on those areas yeah, they cross-pollinate, but the benefit, I have the tremendous pleasure of working with our ASAP, our ED modules team that embeds themselves in this. If anything, it's a plug. Maybe one day you guys should be on our emergency medicine steering board. We have our specialty steering board, which help guide that. Those are frequent contributors. Not that you can't contribute if you're not part of the steering board. You certainly can. But that process of, these are experienced ED docs who are at a variety of different places, academic and small and everything else, who can provide some of that feedback and help us gear those things towards the right settings. And, also it's surfacing, well, what are the current challenges in emergency medicine? Boarding. Okay, well, how would this help those specific problems boarding is not necessarily an ED problem. We all know that. But especially in an integrated environment, we know that there's different levers, different drivers that are going to affect that. How do we do better with, bursts of patients at triage and arrival? How can we triage them off to maybe video triage or split flow models? Use the tools for that. So knowing and being embedded in knowing what the issues are in the specialty helps drive us to be able to say, well, how can we use these tools for specific problems and affect these users?
That's a great point. Yeah. One of the, as a software developer, I don't want to design something for ED users in a bubble with my software development expertise. I want to help bring knowledge about the technology and what it could accomplish, and collaborate with users from both customers and internal folks like Chris to understand both what are the needs, what can we make with it? That's where I can help some. And then is this useful? Does this help? Is it actually accomplishing, solving the goals? And it's always an iterative process, and it doesn't stop at the point of deployment. It's always, continually learn, refine more feedback, and keep making it better.
One of the questions I have about kind of when we're employing these algorithms in the emergency department, certainly from an operations standpoint, there's clear, undeniable value. I think there's a risk, or some people worry about the risk of, perpetuating any kind of inconsistencies or biases in the algorithm. How are you guys approaching kind of that particular issue? Are you using kind of fairness metrics to kind of backwards assess the algorithms? How are we dealing with data sets that may already have inherent biases in them? I'm just kind of curious about that.
Yeah, we have a thorough ethics review process that all of our AI work goes through. And that, say, take predictive algorithms, for an example, that includes both, how representative is the data set? What are the variables that are going into a prediction, not relying on ones that could separate one class from another in an appropriate way. And then also, localizing the data, or localizing the algorithm and the weights to the data set of the organization that's deploying it, so that it best fits their population. And then again, that post-processing monitoring phase of understanding how it works in practice and keeping that feedback loop always open. I think, we have folks that are well skilled on the ethical review side, and have a kind of a common group that looks at all of the different models and how they're deployed. Really important that, this can be a tool that reduces those biases and helps folks make good decisions. And that's a lot of what we focus on with that process.
Yeah, I think the key is to have eyes wide open to know that there's that potential risk, and plan and manage and measure that wherever possible. So, you're accommodating for it.
Yeah. And I think, to go back to what Garrett was saying about the intern and maybe having our humans hallucinate as well. Yeah, humans are biased, right? That's why the data is biased. And so it is imperative that we kind of figure out how to make, these models at least a better generation of ourselves. Our kind of
in the
best face forward.
validation phase, we can give it data sets that represent different classes and then evaluate its performance independently from the whole. And that is a way to try to counter some of that embedded real human bias in the data.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah.
I think one of the areas of, sort of AI and NLP and large language models that DJ and I have been interested in is the ability to extract social risk factors, or what is often termed social determinants of health. I know certain versions of Epic, and depending on the health system, have sort of structured data collection of these non-clinical risk factors. Just curious if there are any models, or if there's any approaches that Epic's taken to sort of try to collect that data, from unstructured clinical narratives, things like that, or if either of you see an opportunity to build that better into EHRs within health systems currently.
My own personal plea is that you guys say yes. Okay.
The shorter answer is absolutely yes. No, I mean,
It's a little bit longer.
It's 2 words. 2 more syllables. You're right. I mean, DJ, you're right. We have the discrete stuff in there. And I think that's part of the key everybody's experiencing is, where do we put that into workflow? How do we have the right provider staff entering that? What are their opportunities? But likewise, can patients enter that? And that's an ongoing larger workflow question that crosses the whole bounds. And for a lot of EDs, I've seen it like, well, there's opportunities, but this could have been done before. If we can use MyChart, we use the patient portal, have the patients do it, have that fit into anybody's workflow where it can. You're right. The other track to go down, and we talked a little bit about ambient note writing. The trajectory on that is, first phase is just write the note. Great. But the second phase, and we've got a release coming out next summer, where we can start extracting out orders. So if you say, well, we're going to need to get a CBC, we're going to get a CMP, we're going to get a PA lateral chest x-ray, and for it to identify that those are potential orders you just stated, tee those up so I can go, yep, sign those and get them going. The concept of identifying discrete elements out of the narrative, well, that's a slippery slope. There's a bunch of stuff we can start pulling out. And so if I were to ask a patient in my regularization about, do you have issues with, getting good food? Are you having, and food risk and insecurity? Then surface those up as discrete elements so we can drive those in. And the same would go for family history, social history, other stuff that we could drive as discrete elements into the chart. So that's directly on the roadmap for us.
And an audio stream of a current visit is nice in the way that it is current, and that, some of these factors change over time, right? And I think similar to the current conversation, as Chris mentioned, there is some of that information buried in HPI from past notes and from other sources. And I think there is room to be able to farm some of that out. And probably more likely tee it up for patient and provider to review. Hey, is this current? Is this accurate? But, it's not limited to just social determinants. One of our really compelling projects is it's pretty simple, pulling out follow-ups from radiology for things like lung nodule findings or follow-up in 3 months. Pull that out of the unstructured note text and get it into a trackable follow-up. Things like that can really move the needle on both our follow-ups and for SODH things to know about the patient.
I think we are reaching kind of the end of our questions. We managed to sneak them all without you guys realizing, I think. And it's just, I found this completely, really enjoyable, super informative. So I just want to thank you guys again, from the bottom of our hearts, at least.
Yeah. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you so much for your time.
Glad to be part of it.
Yeah. Thanks for having us.
Thanks so much for listening to the StatAI podcast. We'll see you again next month for the next episode.